Now we have this soldier and MVP. So you have it in walk and run. Again, if I have to go all the way up to here, walk run state. This is the walk run blend space. I go to event graph, not here, but if I look at my walk run state, yeah, out here, the anim graph. So this is walk run state machine, and this is the final animation pose. I double click on this, and these are all the states that I have. I have the idle state, I have the walk run state. I had to create a new state. So it's very easy to understand this way if it's presented as a graph. So as you enter, you get into idle, and when you start walking or running, it gets into this particular state. Now there are two options here. From idle, you can directly go to crouch and start walking backwards or forwards, or you can probably go to walk and run. So that depends, right? So that there's a possibility of also the player going to the crouch state. So I'm going to create a new state by pulling off a wire from here, and I'll say add state, and I'll call this crouch, not couch, crouch. All right, and move this a little bit to the right, and maybe, yeah, and I think I'll select this guy and I'll make him of equal length like this. I think that's good enough. Okay, so the way you look at it is from the entry of the animation, or from the entry of the player state, he's going to be idle. He's going to start off as idle naturally, and then he can either go into walk run, or he can go into crouch. Now when he's walking or running, he can also enter the crouch state. So you can connect this to this, right? And when he's crouching, he can also go back to his walk and run state. When he lets go, or if he hits the shift button again, if he hits the shift key again, so the player gets up and now he's ready to walk and run. So that means he can go back into his walk and run state. Now the same will apply for the crouch to idle. While he's idle, while the player's idle, he can go to crouch, and while he's crouching, he can re-enter the idle state. So I'm going to connect these two again. So now this forms a chain. So from idle, he can go to walk and run, and from there he can go to crouch or go back to walk and run, and any of these different combinations. Or from idle, he can go to crouch, he can go to walk and run, he can come back to crouch, and then he can go back to walk and run, then he'll go back to idle, and any particular combination. Now with that on, I'm going to double click on this, and now I've entered the crouch state. In fact, I'm going to rename this. I don't like the name of the state. I'll rename this to crouching instead of crouch. Okay, crouching, and compile that, save that, and it says okay, whatever, it's got a bunch of warnings. I'm okay with that, so I'm going to double click on that, and now I'll go over to the asset browser. I'll look for my crouch blend space. I'm gonna, not the walk run, but crouch. I'm gonna drag and drop it here. Okay, and first connect this. And for the direction and speed, as we did earlier, I'm going to drag the direction, I'm going to put it here, I'm going to drag the speed, I'm going to put this here. Right, so now we have the direction and the speed also connected. It's very similar to this. So not this, I think I can close that. I think I can also close that. If I go over to my walk and run, if I double click on this, exactly the same thing, but the blend space has changed and is connected to the final animation pose. And in here, the blend space has changed, connected to the final animation pose, and the direction and the speed are the same variables that we used for the walk run blend space. Okay, so once this is done, when you can compile it, and of course it's going to throw a lot of errors because not everything has been set up. And I'll save this, and I won't close it for now because I need that again. But all our input code is going to happen here, right? All the input binding code happens inside this green box here, and we already have the fire set up. Now, next thing is we have to get our crouch set up. Now, this for the movement, you can have, I think for the movement input, we can add this inside the movement input and not inside the firing. So I'll just expand this and I'll add it here. And of course, if you right click, we don't have any bindings yet. I just spoke about the bindings. We can have different bindings. So we have the primary fire, and we have the reset VR, which we don't need that, and we have the jump, which is already working. So I'm click on this little button and we'll add a new action mapping, and I'll call this crouch, not crouch. And I will map this to my left shift. You can map it to your left control if you want, but I find it comfortable to crouch using my left shift. And I normally use X to go prone completely, but that's my choice. You can obviously go for left control. So you can find left control or CTRL, I guess that would be, yeah. left control, and you can map it to that, but I'm going to map it to left shift, and that's going to work for me. So, and if you want, you can also map it to your right shift if for aiding the right-handed players or left-handed players. So I can also go and say right shift. Okay, so you have two of these mapped up. Now we can go back to third person character and we can add the mapping here. And maybe I'll just add, maybe I'll just increase the space like this, and maybe I'll increase this. Okay, and I'll just add a wall. I'll just say comment. Okay, and I will not add anything. I'll just get rid of this, and I'll make it a narrow one like a wall, and I'll just push it here. Just got nothing, but why not? Okay, something like this, just to create a separation of kind. I'll click this and I'll just move it to the left. Okay, and move it like that, and maybe I can just give it a different color, something like a red. Okay, that just to indicate a separation between this code and that code, right? And now I can actually add my code for crouch. And if I right click and if I say crouch, and you have action events crouch and a bunch of other things that are crouch, that's because you have a character movement component inside third person character. But what we are looking for is the crouch action event. There you go. Okay, and at the same time we also going to need a boolean variable. So I'm going to click on add variable, and I'm going to call this is crouching, I guess, is crouching. Okay, and I'll keep that as boolean. I'll save it, and that would default to false because we don't want the character to start off as crouched. Okay, so the next thing is, now that we already have this crouching, I'm going to hit Alt. With Alt pressed, I'm going to drag this is crouching variable and drop it here. So that is the same as when you drag and say set, that's the same thing as pressing Alt and bringing in the crouching here. So I first connect this to the set here, and I'll just put it here because this has to go both ways. And with that selected, I'm going to hit Control W because I want a duplicate of that. And this will be coming in here. Now, when the player hits the crouch key, the is crouching is going to be enabled, or it's going to turn to true. And when he releases it, it's going to go back to false. Now, once that happens, we also have to make sure that the walk speed inside character movement walk speed right now is, if you look at that, I think max walk speed is 600 and max walk speed crouched is 300. So we are still working with the max walk speed and not working with the max walk speed crouched. So just to be safe, I'm going to drag a reference here, and I'll be bringing this here. I'll keep this as a common reference point, and I'll move this guy a little bit down so that it's uniform. And from here, I'll say set max walk speed. Okay, and this will be set to 300. Okay, and this again, I'll Control W and drop it here, connect this and connect this to the target, and this will be back to 600. All right, so that would be 300 and 600, and that's how we're going to set up the input action crouch, and all the other magic happens inside the blueprint for actually blending the animation between walk and run or idle and crouch and all of that. So going back here, I'll hit compile and I'll save this. Okay, so I'm going to save that and compile that, and we have set up our input crouch. I don't need to close that because I'll have to come back to this sometime. So, and the next thing is we have to use all of this information that it's passing when the crouch key is hit onto the soldier and BP, okay, onto the crouch blend space. And that's what we're going to set up in the next video. So for now, I'm going to cut this short. I'm going to return. When we return, we're going to be setting up the crouch blend space with the variables that we set up here and the information that is coming in from the third person character. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.